Hello there, everyone. For those of you who are new to these webinars, I am Christina Cuprina with an update on the economy and also a bit of guidance on how 2022 is likely to play out. I've split this into two separate webinars because I have a strong belief people shouldn't sit on a webinar for 2 hours at a time. So I'm going to do one today. This one's going to be a bit of a recap on all the things that have happened since last month, and there has been a lot, kind of where we're likely to go between now and the end of the year. And then next one on December 14th, I'm going to have a special guest, Bob Stein from First Trust. He's an economist. He's in Washington, D.C. He's spoken before when we talked about the election around 2020. We're going to have him again to kind of give us a deep dive into what's going on in Washington. So we get to hear an insider's view, an economist's view, like all of our presentations, nonpartisan, informational, but it'll kind of set the stage for what's likely as we go into the 2022 election season and in relation to the economic version of things. That being said, I had a lot of questions that have come in this time, a lot, especially regarding things like inflation. So I'm going to kind of target this whole talk today about the review on where I'm getting the most interest. So if you have questions, please send them in. I want to be sure to focus on things that are most important to you, even if you think I might already know them. This way I get them well in advance of the end of the webinar and don't have a chance to cover all of them. So all questions, send them on in and I will answer them to the best of my ability. That being said, a little bit of a recap of things that happened since last time I spoke. I'm going to talk a bit about some of the things that are getting a lot of headlines and hitting a lot of people in the pocketbook right now. So specifically around the supply chain, I want to say Washington policy and what may happen, the infrastructure bill, which has just recently passed, the Build Back Better bill, which is, we don't know what's in it. We have no idea what's in it. The politicians don't even know what's in it, but some talks a little bit on a high level about that. Again, not going to get into that too much because we don't know if it'll pass and again, what's in it from an economic perspective. Also, it's back again. The debt ceiling debate will come about in December, so expect a lot of fireworks around that. Not necessarily economic impacts, but it wouldn't be unheard of for the politicians to push it to the last minute when cooler heads are saying, hey, we're going to default, get your heads together and get this done. A lot going on. The Democrats are trying to get as much done as they can by the end of the year. They have a lot on their plate. The reason I say the Democrats is a lot of this is policy focused, that's Democrat driven. There's a lot of reasons for this. Some of it is the poll numbers have not been going well for the party in next year's election year. So the idea to get things done, to be able to show the American people that they should be reelected or to stay in power into the next election cycle. That's one. Another one, these are a lot of pocketbook issues that are really hitting people, the economic side of it, especially with inflation, the disruption of the supply chain, the labor force shortages and things like that are hitting a wide swath of Americans, and they're looking to the government to do something about it. So they're getting a lot of whispering in their ear, a lot of angry notes from their constituents. So there's twofold. There's an election, and this is something that's really directly and immediately affecting constituents. So there's this idea to get things done, and they're pushing to get as much done this year as possible. Why? Election years, they tend not to want to disrupt too much. They want to keep calm. They're going to be focused a lot more on being elected or reelected, and the energy changes from policy into to the election. This is not uncommon. All of this is somewhat normal, as is the fact that the party in power generally loses that power, or some, if not all of that power, in the first election after a change in presidents. So all of these things are obviously a lot of energy behind that, a lot of intention behind it to get things done. And so that is where from the economic front, we run the biggest uncertainty to the projections into next year. Some policies can have very meaningful effects on inflation and very meaningful effects on the economy. On numerous factors. So anything I talk about, by the way, I'm speaking as an economist. I do understand that there's a lot of different political beliefs and social beliefs, and I'm by no means trying to say what is right or wrong, just more kind of seeing things with an economic lens. Okay, so I'm going to start with inflation. Inflation, because that's been the biggest one, and talk a bit about it. First, the bad news. It is not transitory. It is not going away anytime soon. It will get worse before it gets better. And the Build Back Better plan is not going to make any difference. Okay, so these are all things that, because I got these questions, I thought I would throw those out right away. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news. But here is the good news. There are things that can be done in personal planning. There are also things that can be done in decision making outside of that can have a big impact on how much that hits. Okay, so I'm going to kind of break it down because there's a lot of different layers. And again, sorry to throw all that bad news out first, but that's exactly why you're listening to me, because you want to hear it, hear what's going to happen, right? Why is it not transitory? The idea from a lot of, I'm going to say, people in the Fed, economists and government figures, you guys know I've been saying for a while it's probably not transitory. It looked in the beginning, though, like it could be. And the reason was, the idea was, is that the inflation was caused because of the shutdowns around COVID. And as things opened up and began to normalize, then the cost would come down. And that's proving to be only one of many factors that have caused inflation. The biggest one is something I've been talking about for a while, is the equivalent of $7 trillion has been pumped in the economy. The M2 money supply is over 40%. When you have all of this money sloshing about, it creates problems in the world of inflation. It's just natural. You have all of this excess supply of money and you have less things to use to buy it. So that's the biggest of all. The biggest of all, money was pumped out to businesses, governments, from the federal government to the states and municipalities, to businesses through PPP loans and other stimulus, to individuals in the form of stimulus checks and enhanced government benefits. And those that didn't get any of that, for the most part, benefited from the appreciation in asset prices. So the money was widely distributed, and it's going to take a while for that to get sucked back out of our economy through natural economic cycles and progressions. So that's the big one. The other one is that there was a huge shift. So all this money's there. So spending didn't really meaningfully decline. We just changed how we did it. More goods, less services. Okay, just think of that, right? Less travel, less restaurants, less, concerts and events, less services, more goods. That led to the pinching through the supply chain. In the beginning, it was things closed down overseas, factories shut down or diminished capacity and things like that. That has largely gone away now. Now there's pinch points. There's only so many container ships. The world wants stuff. Okay, there's only so many people working in the ports. Okay, the unions have a lot of control over how many hours those people work. But even if the unions came around and said, hey, we're going to do this 24/7, just like the rest of the world, there's only so many truck drivers. There's only so much place to store the stuff. So the supply chain issues are not one thing that can easily be solved. It's not like turning on a spigot, right? And it all just gets fixed. To repair the supply chain, it's going to be two things. It's going to be time. It's all that can do. It's time. It doesn't matter how much infrastructure money we spend. It takes time to fix things like this. This is really endemic through the system of the supply chain. It also will be that shift as the pandemic becomes less of an effect on our lives, to going back to more of a balance between the services side and the goods side of things. Expectation at this point is the supply chain issues are going to go on well into 2022. It's going to continue to be a problem, and it's not going to go away. I hit things at a very high level in the supply chain, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here, which is also because it ties into the labor force issues. I think everyone knows at this point, there's a lot more jobs out there than there are people willing or able to fill them. That's creating pinch points as well, right? Doesn't matter how much demand there is, if you don't have enough people to do it, you have to shut your restaurant earlier. You can only drive so many trucks in your fleet. We need workers for things that require workers, and there are not enough of them. Why are there not enough of them? There's a lot of reasons for it. The idea was, and it was a very valid idea, was as extended unemployment ran out, people would jump back into work. And that did happen to a degree. Notice, because some states did it right away and some states took longer, so it was easy to able to kind of track what was likely to affect. But there's something to remember, is that a significant portion of the United States doesn't go back to work when the unemployment benefits run out. They go back to work when the money runs out. So that's when the stimulus runs out. So some people save and save for any day, and other people live When the money runs out, I go back to work. When the money runs out, I go to work. It's a different mindset, a different way of thinking. So there was a bit of a lag on that. And it turned out through polling that it was, it's not that the unemployment, it was now there's no more money, I have to go back to work. That coincided, though, a lot with another thing in parts of the country that were more shut down. The schools were reopening. So that did alleviate some of that uncertainty. Though early on, there was still uncertainty because your kids still could be sent home if there was an outbreak at the school. So there was a degree of uncertainty there for working families, even when the kids originally went back. That's become more and more and more mitigated. It's become less of an issue than originally feared. In addition, now the kids are getting vaccinated. So by and large, that concern by parents or schools, I would imagine that will likely change over time. Another one, and this is an important one to bring up, I said it before, but this is important. 10,000 people a day are turning 65. People are retiring at very high rates right now. Fortunately, there's more millennials than there are baby boomers, so that will balance out over time. It's just the timing of how these are hitting. A lot of people have rethought their lives. They've decided they want to work less. They want to work differently. They want to change their life. They want to retire sooner. I've said this also before. I've never had this many changes to financial plans of our clients or new people planning since I've been doing this. People are rethinking lives, and if they don't really feel joy or called to work and they don't have to, they're more likely to step back than they may have been pre-pandemic. So all of these things are leading to, a diminished number of workers, and the demand in many areas has picked up above the pandemic. When I talk about real estate, I'll kind of give you a really great breakdown of why. So all of these things are pushing these pressures on, or inflationary pressures. To a smaller degree, but one that needs to be brought up, is government policy can impact inflation as well. The more money you put into the system, regardless of what you call it, whether it's a stimulus check or a new government program, money put in the system can create inflation elsewhere, right? And I'll give an example, kind of representative example story. Giving childcare, low cost or free childcare to working mothers with an income cap, right? So if you make this much or less, you will receive subsidized or free childcare. That has less of an inflationary impact. If anything, it could be beneficial because it allows more parents to go back to work or go back to school to do things to enhance their future earnings potential. In contrast to that is a monthly check being given out based on the number of children you have, because that puts money in people's pockets there's not necessarily a need for that money. When I'm defining need economically, not personally. There's a need for it because they're not working. They don't need to have the childcare necessarily. And it's by number of children, not based on need. So you start to create, again, these imbalances in the system where things start to become inflationary. What becomes inflationary? Childcare. Because now there's too much money chasing after. There's only so many childcare workers. So in doing that, the government has to think of these stages. First, we need to build the infrastructure, and then we need to provide the service, and then we need to mindfully think about who needs this and how it's best to distribute it. So that's one example of government policy can create an inflationary environment. It can create misaligned incentives, and it can also create a system of a challenge if it's not being able to continue to be kept. In other words, a new administration comes in, they take that benefit away. That can create significant problems as well economically, right? Because now people are losing their jobs. They can no longer work because they don't have this safety net, for an example. So again, I want to put that out there as an example. Putting money into programs and systems does not help with inflation. This has been said by some of our politicians. It does not make inflation go away. If anything, it can make it worse. It doesn't necessarily make it worse, though, either. But it's not a solution. It is very, very hard to solve for inflation. It's easy to create it. It's hard to make it go away. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, the Reagan administration had to do some really painful, difficult things to the economy, rapidly rising interest rates and other things that really hurt the economy, hurt a lot of people, but it was the only way to crack hyperinflation. So it's really not a state that the government wants to find itself in, of having to chase. It's not the government, I misspoke. The Fed wants to find itself in of chasing it. So it's important to keep the balance on how we stimulate the economy or help or put programs in place, and how we might be mindful of the fact that I think a breakdown of wage increases over this last period of time was 6 to 7% was the average wage increase, okay, across the board over the last year. These are year-over-year numbers. And so to divide that by 3 tiers, though, the highest paid, the mid level, and the lowest level paid. The people in the middle, it was about 7% plus, okay? So you got that, 5, 6, even 7% at the high end. You got 7% in the middle. How about 13% on the lowest waged employees? 13%. Like, wow, that's amazing. And that has really done a lot to help people have more money in their pockets. This is a group of workers that have not seen the benefits since 2008 with these low interest rate environments, and keeping this low inflation environment really impacts the lowest paid workers the most. So this is a great boost, and it sounds like a wonderful thing. And then you start to go into inflation numbers. And you realize in some parts of the country and some of these people, they've actually make less money when adjusted for inflation. Let that sink in for a minute. Because of the cost of inflation in the goods and services that these people are most impacted by, they're losing money, even though their wages have gone up meaningfully. This is something to consider. So that's why you can't think of something in isolation, right? The government does this, oh, it's going to help these people, but then whack, inflation takes it all away. That's the balancing. The people most impacted by inflation are 2 groups of people. When I'm saying this, I'm being very general. But there's people on a fixed income, be it government payments, or they're getting payments, alimony, anything like that. But it's a fixed income level that they can't adjust at. That's one group. The second group of people are most impacted by it are the people that are, sometimes these two are the same thing, not necessarily. So that, again, the government impact is Social Security, government benefits, etc. The second group of people are people that live off of a fixed income, low income. Why? Because there's less room to adjust to rising costs. Something I've been saying to my clients, and I'm saying it more, and I'm going to say it here in this webinar. And if you're not my client, also, seriously, look at this. This is very important. If you're at or near retirement, closely watch your spending numbers and make sure you're still in line with your financial plan. I expect this will continue well beyond 2022 at this point into 2023, and which we'll start to see a turn. So make sure that your sources of income are keeping up with inflation. Be sure of that, and project that out, and work closely with myself or Katie or your financial professionals to make sure this is the case. If you're self-directed and doing this own, make sure you do your calculations. Do not use the traditional metric of inflation. Use your current inflation. Look at your costs and monitor each year how much they're going up or down, and align this. Again, I can show you how to do this. This is important to be able to offset this, because that's a pretty quick leakage when your essential costs are going up at the rate that they're likely to go up for these next couple of years. And I don't want to, again, use this as something to concern you. This is awareness. Awareness is key. Awareness allows you to plan and make decisions that help balance this out. There's also 2 parts of it. Remember, there's your essentials and then there's your fun stuff. So I would guess, reasonable guess, that people will be doing more fun stuff next year, as now we have a COVID pill, for lack of a better term, that significantly reduces your chance of getting sick, hospitalized, or dying. Everyone who wants to at this point can get vaccinated, even the kids. That's great news. And I'm being very generalist. I clearly understand some people cannot get vaccinated because of healthcare advice and the like of it. I'm speaking collectively as a society. The risks of COVID are diminishing based on these factors that are coming up. Even if the case rates don't, the concerns about becoming seriously ill or dying because of the pill, because of the vaccines, etc., are likely to continue to diminish. The FDA came out and said they expect us to shift early next year. They're targeting January, from a pandemic to an endemic, which means we go from pandemic to, it's kind of like the flu. FDA's words, not mine. Don't take COVID or medical advice from an economist. I'm bringing this up economically, as if anything, things are going to open up further next year. There's talk that a lot of the few states left that actually have any mask mandates will remove those, and there's going to be even more and more openness. That being said, that shift from the goods into services will slow the rate of inflation. If COVID doesn't do what it's projected to do at this point, and we stay in this environment longer than expected, inflation will likely increase, provided the economic ability is there to sustain it. Okay, so that's a lot of inflation stuff right there. I'm going to check notes on that real quick. I see some questions, and I have more here. I'm going to answer them in just a moment. To answer CPI numbers, okay, CPI is the government definition of inflation. It's probably going to stay at 4% for a while. Okay, just get used to it. It's not going to be the super high spike we had last year, but those numbers are going to moderate and stay high for quite a while. The next driver of inflation, in other words, we kind of had it come in waves. We had some materials like wood, and that came up and then it moderated. And we have things that moderate, and some things are going to stay longer and some are going to kind of taper off. Semiconductors are going to go through 3 phases. Semis are important. Why are semis important? They're kind of in a lot of our stuff. It's driven a lot of the early supply chain issues, the early problems that we had. The first part of the supply chain issue with semiconductors will probably start to moderate later this year, early next year. That's the pure supply issue. Next, we need to get a lot more produced. Next, more factories have to be built, because this is more of a permanent problem as more and more technology is incorporated in more parts of our lives. That trickles down into everything, and that's part of some of the delayed. But I have to bring up an important thing to you, which is rents and housing. Okay, housing is unlikely to decline significantly in price for the foreseeable future on a national level. Okay, I'm not here to in any way override the expertise from the real estate professionals, but I will say to you right now, what used to be local, which is there wasn't enough houses in the places people wanted to live, has now become more national. There's simply not enough supply for the demand. Yes, low mortgage rates, interest rates on mortgages have exacerbated this. Yes, a lot of extra money in the system, people having the means to buy houses. There's a lot of things that have driven this forward, but the core issue is supply and demand that is not going away anytime soon. It does not matter what the government does, because you can't create more places to build unless we change a lot of our current housing rules and building rules, and we simply don't have enough construction workers to do the work. This is a national issue, and that's not going away anytime soon. So expect housing prices to stay high. The appreciation rate is probably going to more flatline or slow. And again, I'm being very broad here. I understand every market is different, but there's unlikely to see a major correction in housing, barring a significant government policy or government mandate that can harm the industry itself, whether it's a local issue or a national issue. And there's been some interesting things floating around out there. I believe, and I did not read this, so I only just read a couple of sentences. The city of Santa Cruz was talking about charging people $5,000 or $6,000 a year who didn't live in their homes full time. I'm not even sure if that's allowed or legal or can even pass as a rule, but something like that may shift people who have second homes to selling them to people who are going to live there full time, which would dry up even further the rental stock of that area. And given the fact it's a college community, that could really be a challenge and drive rents up higher. I'm giving any economist viewpoint on this. But you see, there's examples of things. Sometimes government policies, localized, state, national, can have a big impact on where people are living. Another factor is California is continuing by all data to have a significant outflow in population. We don't have exact numbers yet because it takes a while, because the most accurate information to use is federal tax filings, because it's easy to track where they filed last year, where they filed this year, and it's something that's very difficult for people to, it's pretty accurate generally. That being said, we don't have 2020's data yet, so we don't have post-pandemic numbers, but even before that, it was picking up, and in addition to that, the ancillary data is showing that that's picking up. I'm not here by any means to pick on California, but I am here to bring up the economic impact won't be known until we see, again, speaking as an economist here, California has the highest percentage of population on government benefits, okay, but they also have a tremendous level of wealth. So there's a percentage of California that's paying the taxes and not using the benefits, and there's another percentage of California that's using the benefits but not paying the taxes. So who's leaving is what's going to make the biggest economic difference, right? Are people leaving who are just, it's too expensive and they're out of the state, or are people leaving for other reasons? And is it impacting and how much is it impacting California's ability to generate revenue or to bring in revenue? This is all unknown. There's a lot of opinions on the subject and I can't speak for certainty, but those types of things cause states to make adjustments because they need to find the revenue to support their population. They're going to look for it from somewhere, from the people remaining here. Conversely, states that are seeing big inflows of people, they maybe they're lower cost, maybe they have lower taxes, maybe this or that, but now their need for infrastructure is going to increase. You can't significantly increase your population and not build out the right infrastructure, the schools, the roads, the sewers, etc. So where will they get that money? What challenges will that state face? So the population shifts largely brought about by the pandemic, and people could live and work differently than they thought. Those will start to minimize over time, but it does change a bit on the states and where people are laying out. So I'm going to take a stop here before I go into the other things and talk and look at some of the questions, and please add more, and then I'll dive into the next parts of it. Okay. How will the increase in inflation affect my investments? Ooh, got two of those. Depends on what you're invested in. So some sectors and areas of the economy are more sensitive to inflation than others. Remember, I'm using inflation in a general term. What is inflation really? I say to everybody, it's personal. Your inflation, it can be different than your neighbor's inflation. Pre-pandemic, we would say we were in a very low inflation environment. Inflation was hardly ever talked about. There was no real inflation. And people say, oh, there's no inflation, unless you were sending your kid to college. And they had another kid to send 3 or 4 years later, and you're like, what happened? Right? So cost of education, cost of college, inflation's been significant for an extended period of time. So inflation is very personal. I am speaking in general numbers. Some companies, especially in the technology space, are going to be much more impacted by rising interest rates, which is the Fed's response to inflation, not necessarily inflation itself. Some companies will be impacted by inflation, but not really impacted by the Fed raising rates. So remember, there's two pieces to this puzzle that we have to watch. The Fed and what they do, and the economy and what it's doing. But on a high level, companies with a tremendous amount of debt that's coming due, it's kind of my job to research this, they're going to have to start to refinance at higher rates as the rates go up. That's going to impact the company's ability to use their revenue towards growth. That will impact their stock price. Again, being very simplistic, there's a lot more to it, but these are just some ideas to kind of think about with this. Certain types of fixed income will be much more sensitive to rising interest rates, but not necessarily inflation. Okay. Companies also too, these are the high level inflation numbers, wage inflation. How dependent are they on workers as opposed to a technology company a pure technology company, not like an Amazon, that's a bit of both, but a pure technology company may be less impacted by wages, right? And workers, as opposed to a heavy, dense employee business, say like a store, like a retail operation or something like that, consumer space. I'm going to give high levels because I'm supposed to not give any investment recommendations or things like that on a webinar that's the general public can participate in. So please talk to me individually. I know who you are who asked this question, and we can always talk, and I can tell you like more specifically. I'm watching clients' portfolios for two things. The companies we own, are they likely to be impacted by the inflation we already know can model? The nice thing about it is that this stuff is easy to model. As opposed to the unknown, which is what the Fed's going to do when they're going to do it. They guide us, but we still don't know because they don't know. And also what the government may or may not do. So there's the kind of easy to model, and then the more you have to watch for changes in it. The big thing I will say to individual investors is a little bit about stock inflation, individual company inflation, more than inflation, which is there are companies out there with the valuations that are just ridiculous. Okay. And they just are unlikely to grow much from here. Unlikely to grow much, but they're hard to get people to sell because they've done so darn well. It doesn't mean they're going to tank. It just means that sometimes you want to get off the fast bus that's slowing down to get on the slow bus that's speeding up. So the consideration is what's likely to do well in the economy going forward as opposed to what's done well in the economy in the past. Though there are some areas that are more obvious, like some of the things that were great plays during the pandemic have dropped significantly in value because There's only so many people that need or want to use their product, and they're very specific to the shelter-in-place lifestyle. We're seeing that with more and more companies. The valuations were high, earnings are starting to say it's time to come down to earth. But there's also a lot of companies out there going to do really well in this environment. They're just starting to perk their heads up. Been kind of stagnant for a while. So it's more rotation than an in or out thing. But the thing to really understand is it's not just the sector, it's also the company and how they're positioned with debt and growth projections. A final thing I want to add to that is also coming into the real estate sector, and that is people need a place to live. So they're going to build houses to rent, or they're going to build houses to sell. Okay? That's not going anywhere anytime soon. So there's a lot of opportunities in that sector. It's also potentially can be, if properly done, can be an inflation hedge if you're able to raise rents along with the overall inflation, as opposed to something that's paying a fixed income. But not all real estate is equal. Some of it is very poorly positioned, and you probably don't want to have it because of the financials don't make sense. So that's something to look at. Is the provision for the IRA to Roth conversions going away in 2022 or in the near future? Go ask them in Washington. They don't tell us anything anymore. They used to tell us. Now they kept their mouths shut because they didn't like the bad press. Anyway, we don't know if that's going to be in so the Build Back Better plan was originally connected to the infrastructure plan for reasons which make absolutely no sense to me whatsoever, because one was bipartisan, the infrastructure bill, and the other one was hyper-partisan, Build Back Better. One was 10 years, a couple $1 trillion. I know I'm making that sound like it's nothing, but it's infrastructure and it's over 10 years. The other one was $3.5 trillion, and it was kind of just dump it in the system for the most part. So there's a huge difference in the two bills, a lot of ways. The biggest one being the partisanship or bipartisanship to it. So the infrastructure bill was easy. The Build Back Better one was a lot more complicated. Even within the Democratic Party, they couldn't come to agreements. So it was dragging the whole thing out. And then they decoupled the two of them through some pretty amazing political maneuvering, I have to say, from what I understand of it. And now the infrastructure's passed. It's slow. It's over 10 years. Yes, there's pork in it. There's pork in everything they do in Washington. There's some really silly pork in there, but it's not too egregious as opposed to Build Back Better plan. Build Back Better plan is much more towards social priorities and some other areas. That's kind of the grand idea for reshaping society, for lack of a better term. I don't know exactly call it, like the New Deal concept. A lot of new stuff, a lot of big spend, a lot of haven't been done before or new ways of thinking. The challenge to Build Back Better is it has to go through reconciliation. There is no bipartisanship, to the best of my knowledge, on this bill. So it means they have to pay for it. Originally, they were talking about their ideas to try and drum up interest. It sort of went the other direction and got a lot of pushback from the constituents to the congresspeople. And so we less and less could hear what was in these bills. The only way we know is when it goes to the budget budget office committee, or the Ways and Means committee. So CBOE, I think it is, or the Ways and Means. Then it gets released. Then we can read it, and then we can figure out what's in it. So we're expecting any day. It may have even come out today. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, to be able to get that report. That report will tell us the answer to your question. Are they eliminating Are they eliminating the Roth conversions? Are they limiting Roth conversions to people at a certain income level? Are the mega backdoor Roths going away, which was a great strategy for a lot of people? I personally, as a planner and as an economist, I would be really disappointed they got rid of Roth conversions, because that is the greatest gift we can give to our young people, young workers, to be able to do a Roth conversion, convert their IRA or 401k money into a Roth and let it grow tax-free for the rest of their lives. Their taxes will be so much higher than ours are today. It's a great gift. So I hope it doesn't go away. For a lot of reasons, I hope it doesn't go away. But unfortunately, nobody asks me in Washington, and best I know, I'm not at this point in office. So right for office. So I can't say yet. Unfortunately, and again, another unfortunate to it is that I have a feeling this thing's going to pass right at the end of the year. Right? It's going to bump up right against the end of the year. There's going to be little or no time to do any strategy or planning around it. I'm not going on vacation. I'll be here. I'll let you know if this is happening. But if you're thinking to do conversions, and it makes sense to your, you're getting that advice from your CPAs, your financial planners, advisors, whomever, I just say go ahead and get it done. Because even if taxes could be higher next year, it makes sense to get it done. Don't wait till the last minute, because we just don't know if that will go away. When you say pill for COVID, you're referring to the vaccination, or is there actually a pill? That's what happens when I try and talk about science and medical stuff. Yes, Pfizer and I believe AstraZeneca, one of the other companies, has come out with a COVID pill. I don't know the specifics on how it works. I would recommend Googling it. The concept to it is that based on the FDA testing, 89% of the people who took it did not require serious hospitalization or death, right? I don't know the specifics of when you take the pill, when you're sick, before you're sick, what it does, but it's a therapeutic as opposed to a vaccine. It's just another tool in the toolbox of ways to prevent people, not from getting COVID. Basically, they're telling us it's not going anywhere, but not getting seriously ill. COVID becomes a flu, as opposed to something that may land you in the hospital or worse. But please, I apologize. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Do look it up. Pfizer, I know, has one, and there was another company that came out with one as well. I'm not sure where it is in the process or how widely it's being used yet. Anything that works and is approved is a good thing. In SD, it isn't wise to give up on masks as vaccination rates are low. Of course, there's no mask mandate here. Infection rates are heading up. I can't speak specifically to what policies people are. I apologize, I didn't read that very well because I need better glasses when I'm reading those small things. Maybe I should move this over. I can't comment on the economics. I'm sorry, I can only comment on the economic components to it. We see that the states that are open with little to no restrictions or mandates are doing far better economically. This is organic, notwithstanding government stimulus checks, right? Or checks to the states are doing far better economically than the states that continue to have restrictions. Whether it's a right thing or a wrong thing from a health standpoint, I will leave that to the experts, and I know there's a lot of different opinions on the matter. For example, California state has no mask mandates of any kind in the general public, right? I believe they do in schools and whatnot. And some counties are completely open, and some counties you have to show proof of vaccination just to go into a restaurant. So two pretty big extremes in COVID policy within the same state. And at this point, it has been shown time and time again that lockdown, not lockdown, this, that, or the next thing, you could have a spike, you could have a decline, but there's no consistency in if you do these steps, you can, over time, keep your rates low. It just keeps popping up. Right now, Florida and Texas have lower rates. This might not be today's data, have lower rates than California. And you're going, how is that? They're like completely open. But they had a big spike before. So I don't know. I guess I can't speak to that. But economically, the states that are open are doing a lot better economically than the states that are closed. And it makes sense as people feel more open, they can do more things, they feel safer doing so, whether it really is safe or not. Naturally, more money flows that direction. And the same probably goes for workplaces and reopening. But again, I'm speaking purely from the economic perspective. I understand there's a lot of different opinions on all things COVID at this point. The considered empty homes tax impacts unused housing, not rental properties. Typically second homes that are rarely occupied. I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement, but it is correct. It's basically homes. If you have a second home in Santa Cruz and you live elsewhere, then there's a proposal that they're going to tax you or you're required to pay a fee. Again, I don't know where that is in process. Best I know, it's only a conversation right now as opposed to happening. But yeah, that's a good thing if that was a clarifying question. It does not apply to rentals. As long as somebody's living there, you're probably exempt. But I'm not an expert in that rule. Okay. This is a question I have to be careful with because the regulators don't care for it much. Question on cryptocurrency. And Okay, I comment on this question. I'm changing this question a little bit because the regulators are really strict on talking about cryptocurrency. So the question is about crypto coming more into the mainstream. Okay, so before I say anything, I am not allowed to make any recommendations in a public forum regarding cryptocurrencies. Any advice or recommendations or conversation on that has to be made on a one-on-one individual basis. Okay, now I've said that. There are ways of it becoming more mainstream by being available in trusts that are tradable on the exchanges, and also through ETFs and other vehicles that are more accessible to the average person than having crypto wallet and having it set with directly having the coins. That being said, they're not actually owning the coins. You're owning futures in the coins, or you're owning the coins in a trust. So the value of your security could be well above or well below the actual value of the coins. And that's probably a conversation longer than I'm going to have today to explain why that's the case. So if you're buying a lot of the readily available publicly available securities, you have to consider the fact that in this point, you'll probably be paying a lot more than you would be if you were buying directly the coin. The biggest risks in this area are twofold. Number one, there is no intrinsic value. It is a perceived value based on a limited supply of something, and that's a consideration with that. I'm not, again, saying whether people should or shouldn't do it. I have a whole lot of thoughts on that I can give somebody individually. The second thing is, it is something that the government could shut down or alter or change at any time for any reason, and would do so if they saw it to be a threat to the monetary system. So it is something to really understand well as you're making this decision. There's a lot of different ways to access them. There's a lot of different ways to invest in them. Know the pros and cons of each. And I recommend consult with someone who's qualified to be able to answer the questions, and perhaps even more than one person to fully understand it. Investing in this space at all. Okay, hopefully I'm allowed to say all that stuff. But it's really important. I really would love to talk more about that. I'm just limited to how I'm able to in this forum. Okay. If COVID goes to an endemic status, will the emergency use of the vaccine go away? No, you're referring to the Biden administration's, the emergency use of the vaccine go away. I have no idea. There's a lot of things that seem not to make a lot of sense based on where we are in the virus's cycle. Restrictions increasing in times when there's less risk, for an example. It doesn't make sense to me logically, but that's not my area of expertise. And again, I understand there's a lot of different opinions on this. I don't know what really, from an FDA or a CDC approval point, it makes something go from an emergency use to an approved use. From a experimental use, say like they do with certain new things that come out for treatments for deadly diseases, they'll allow doctors to use it off-label to try to see, but it's not really approved for that yet. All of these things are really beyond my knowledge and understanding, so I can't really answer that with any certainty from an economist's view. I will say that the mandate that was put out on companies over 100 people, I think there's a good probability that's actually not going to happen. OSHA's kind of made it clear. There's a lot of legal questions if that's overstepping the boundaries of the allowances of what OSHA can do. It's not really moving the needle much as far as the number of people be vaccinated with the mandates. I think all of these things here, as well as the fact that it's kind of expected this is going to move to endemic, I think the mandates are less likely to be enforced. I can speak to that more than I can speak to it. But then again, remember, it's our politicians, and it's very hard to predict which direction they're going to go. Again, my apologies because I'm answering the question because I say I'll ask everything answered to me with the giant caveat of this is outside of my expertise. And I'm not 100% certain by any means. Not as much as I know about the other stuff I talked about. Okay. Are mutual funds going to perform poorly? And I'm assuming it says 2027, but I'm just going to go with it's next year. It depends. It depends on what the fund is. That's all I can say. It depends on what the fund is. It depends what the sector is. It depends how good the manager is. It depends on a lot of factors. There's always this argument of what works better, passively investing or actively investing. And then the passive people go, here's all the ways active is worse. And the active people say, here's all the ways passive is worse. And you know what? They're both right and they're both wrong. In certain market environments, passive does better, and other market environments, active does better. These last 3 years, it's all been about active. Early and after the financial crisis, passive way outperformed active. Everything in the markets is cyclical. There is no one right answer. The direction you should go depends on factors that are more personal, in addition to where we are in the markets right now. It's being said, sometimes people say, oh, it costs more. Well, it does, but what is your performance net of fees? That's what's important. What's the probability of you achieving the goal, right? It's a lot of factors that go into it beyond that. So that's a really important question. What I would recommend doing, because I don't know who the question asker is having that conversation. I'd be more than happy to be with me or with someone else, but someone who's a professional that can really go through a deep dive analysis of what you're investing in or what you're thinking of investing in and give you the pros and cons to that. Okay. Really important thing, make sure that, they're not selling anything because it may be biased towards one product or another, but kind of get that high level objective advice, regardless of whether, you're going to have them do investment work for you. We'll kind of help you with that decision making. There's a good and bad in everything. All right, I'm going to jump into these questions then. Will inflation affect Social Security payments? That's a good one because they're going up next year. Yay. Probably not as much as inflation, but yes, they're going up. Maybe the last time for a while. But Social Security payments are, I forgot if it's 5.8 or 6%. I'll remember the exact number. I didn't look at that on my notes. Yes, they're going up next year. So celebrate there. That will be one thing that will help. Okay, just a second. I'm going to move this over so I can see the rest of the notes here. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to do that one last if I have time for it. It's longer. Will free community college work? Question mark. Oh boy. It depends. It depends. First off, in anything that we're thinking of doing, the infrastructure must be built first. If you give everybody free community college, we have to be sure we have enough teachers and infrastructure to serve these students, to teach these students. The beautiful thing is now is we got this thing called virtual learning that's been around for a while, but suddenly got popular in the last 2 years. So it is possible to give a lot more people a good college education, even if there's not nearby a physical place with a teacher in the room. A teacher can teach thousands of students in their area of expertise and not necessarily being confined to a geographic location or a classroom. So yes, it could work if done in a way where resources were optimized. That really, really good trigonometry teacher is not limited to their city and their state and one little classroom anymore. They can teach everybody. This could be incorporated into K-12 classes with, of course, physical teachers in the room to be with the students. So it's possible to be able to cost effectively provide free community college. Again, I'm speaking high level. There's probably a million things that educational experts will tell me are wrong. Theoretically, it's possible. However, the wise thing is to have some skin in the game, some responsibility on the student's end. So perhaps if you have I'm making this up, educators will set the rules. They're smarter than me. B average and above, it's all free. You work hard as a student, you keep a B average, you don't have to pay for any of your college. C average, you pay 50%, I'm making this up, of course. D average, you pay. So maybe something in there that puts a little bit of skin in the game and some responsibility, which would prevent people just nesting in college for a decade. So maybe there's a little bit of a trade-off there, but theoretically it seems possible to do this if we utilize more technology and virtual learning and things like that. But it would be really great. That'd be a great webinar just to have with educators and people that really could understand how that could happen. Because education is an investment in your future if done properly. And stress that one enough. If done properly, you're investing in you or your children's future. If done improperly, all you're doing is saddling everybody with debt that they won't be able to pay off. But it is a really important thing, and to be able to get access to more people is really critical to our success as a nation economically. It's a really good question. Will the inflation plan create more inflation? I'm not sure how to answer that question because I'm not sure what the inflation plan is. I think I talked earlier, any plan that the government puts out has a potential to have economic impacts, which are not often known until well after they're even implemented. So I apologize for the asker of this question. I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but hopefully that helps. What are the markets going to do at the end of the year? Will Christmas be a disaster? I'm guessing it's supply chain related as well. If I had to pick a side on this, I would say we're going to have an amazing Christmas shopping season, okay? Regardless of the supply chain issues. Everything may not be everywhere, but you're going to be able to get things you really want for the most part, okay? The news media will tell us about empty shelves and this isn't available and that's not available. That may well be true. Everyone knew this was going to be a problem months and months and months in advance, okay? So companies who are well positioned to plan for it, Walmart just came out with their earnings. Walmart created their own supply chain. There's little impact to all of this disruption with Walmart, with Amazon, with Home Depot. They built out around it. They're in a much better position. Now, I'm sure everyone doesn't do all their Christmas shopping at those 3 retailers, so there's a lot of other considerations as well. The bigger issues, I think, are going to be workforce. Enough workers for physical, brick and mortar shopping might be more of an impact than necessarily the supply chain issues at this point. By and large, it should be a blowout season. Unfortunately, a lot of that blowout is going to be because of inflation and the cost of everything is higher. People are getting together again. Everyone, very general, I know there's exceptions. By and large, everyone wants to get vaccinated. Families are getting together again. People are traveling. A lot of families didn't get together last year, so they're going to make up for it this year. So if I had to pick a side, I'd say it's going to be a great Christmas season from the shopping, getting together, and travel aspect. Of course, I don't know. We could have a resurgence of, another COVID variant or something like that. At this point, though, I'm going to go on that direction that people, just based on the behaviors I'm seeing, people are done. They want to get out. They want to see people, and by and large, I think that's going to happen. And that the spending picks up. Even if you're not buying gifts, you're going to buy turkeys and all the rest of it. So I'm going to lean towards the side. We rise higher between now and the end of the year, and we have a pretty robust shopping season for Christmas. That's the best I can do on that. All right, I'm going to check my last list here, and then if not, I will close up with the final answers here. I think I got it all. Okay, so let me just see here. I got most of this. So I think, if I may, the last few minutes that we have together, talk a little bit about kind of some planning considerations as we approach the end of the year, because I'll have much less time to talk about it next time. Oh, actually, my apologies. I'll do that last. The question I had that I thought might take a little while, but I think I can cover both, is I was asked to please explain your comments on climate change a bit more. I'm curious. I think that was last time when I was in a really big hurry in 30 minutes to get everything out, and I talked a little bit about the economics of climate change, which in itself should be an entire webinar. I shouldn't cram that into a small period. And kind of by and large, what I was saying is that the change is going to happen by individuals' decision making, more so than by government policy. The reason for this is governments, politicians in US, they think on election cycles. All right, so it's 2 to 4 years, there's going to be a change, and you can't really affect long-term major significant change with those short timelines, right? Short timelines. The change comes from the individuals. Economically, I'm speaking again, I'm not by any means an expert on anything to do with climate change. We don't know if we can actually make a difference. There's a lot of debate on whether we can change this. I'm not going there because I'm not even remotely qualified to comment on it. But I would say if it's changing, infrastructure first. We really need to be sure our infrastructure is set up regardless of our sources of power and how we go about doing things. So a big focus on infrastructure. It's bipartisan. It's needed. It can withstand a change in administration. Build the infrastructure needed in tandem with any other changes that are being made. I think that's what I kind of tried to spurt out very, very, very quickly. The more consensus you can get, the more lasting the change is. And we desperately need work on our infrastructure overall. Even some of the most basic things. I mean, California, what is it, supposed to be one of the biggest economies in the world, and the power doesn't even stay on. Just think about that for a minute. The roads are worse than most other states. There's a lot of things you look at that and go, how can that be? It's infrastructure. Focus on that. And then you focus on it, whether we all have EVs or we all have giant fossil fuel Hummers, we all still need the same roads. So think about how the roads work, how our electricity transmits regardless of its source. Build this out in tandem, because regardless of what we do for our sources of energy and what we do for the environment, we have to have the infrastructure there. So I hope that didn't come across in my rush of in any way discounting the importance of taking care of our planet, more so of kind of a way of seeing it kind of more expansively. So that was the answer there. And I got a bunch of highs there. I'll do that part later. So the planning aspect around everything I said, I don't wish this ever to come off as a negative, like, oh my gosh, it's all getting bad sort of situation, because it's not. Change is constant. Things are always changing. We're not likely to have a recession next year. Take that as a good thing. We are likely to have inflation. Take that as a planning thing. You can plan around these things. You can adapt around these things. There are many, many things that can be done to mitigate a lot of this. And oftentimes the media is like, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. No, there's no bad. It's just a matter of planning around these things, because one person's bad is another person's benefit. Inflation's great if you have a lot of rental properties, right? Inflation's terrible if you're living off of Social Security as your sole source of income. It's all relative, so plan around this. There's rarely a situation that can't be planned and mitigated by planning. I'm doing this if you're my client, but for those of you who aren't, give your portfolio a really deep clean, just to be sure, am I positioned properly in the changes that are taking place going forward? That would be a good idea. Give your financial plan a good once over. Make sure there's anything meaningfully changed from when I last made this projection, right? If you really are focused on, as we call it at Sequoia, the work optional lifestyle, which means you no longer have to work for money, kind of like the holy grail to get there. What's the best way to get there so these external factors are less an impact to me and my future success? These are things to think about. Tax law is going to change. The markets are going to change. The government's going to change. Your life is going to change. My life, everything's going to change. Change is constant. How do you adapt to that? How do you understand it? Because understanding how you're positioned makes the news a lot less scarier. Understanding your plan and how you can achieve what's most meaningful and important to you and your family, it takes away a lot of that fear. Because in absence of that, the news can whip you from one direction to the other. Whether, did I make the right investment? Am I positioned right? This going to happen, or this going to happen, this going to happen. There's always something. How are you positioned for that something will put you more in a state of calmness and contentment, which I would say is an important part of a well-lived life. So I can't stress this enough. Many of you have heard me say this many times, but it's from my heart. I so incredibly want to express my gratitude to each and every one of you that entrusts me and our team at Sequoia with your future, with your plan, with your investments, with answering all of your financial questions, with helping your children, with helping your parents. It's a huge, huge honor, and incredibly thankful for the ability to be able to do that. Do not hesitate to reach out with questions, whether you want to schedule a quick call with me or sit down and have a proper, Zoom or in-person meeting. More than happy to do that. Even as things change, I will reach out to you when I think you need to know something. If not, I'm just going to do it behind the scenes, but always available to talk to you. It's an important thing to know. If you're not a client and you wish to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to answer your questions. You do not have to hire me or work with me. Out of respect to my clients, they will always have first position, especially in year-end planning, but I'll at least get you on the right path to be sure that you're properly, again, aligned with what your goals are. With that being said, I will see you all, hopefully all of you, if not more, on the 14th of December with Bob Stein. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to send your questions in advance and just let me know if it's for the webinar or if you want me to call you and answer them. Thank you all very much for listening. And if I don't see you beforehand, I will see you in December. Bye for now.